Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we are jumping right into one of the most intense, yet somehow completely invisible, moments in modern economic history. We're going to unpack the sheer mechanics of how money is actually created and the massive cultural shockwaves that follow. We're looking at a single decision made in Washington that literally echoed through living rooms and trading floors all over the globe. Just two words, respectfully, no. It doesn't sound like much, right? But as we're about to see, this simple, incredibly polite phrase carried the weight of the entire American economy behind it. It was spoken by a man named Thomas Hoenig, who was casting a highly controversial and very lonely dissenting vote against the leadership of the Federal Reserve. For this explainer, we're focusing strictly on the events documented in Chapter 6 of our source material, appropriately titled The Money Bomb. We are zeroing in on one highly consequential day, November 3rd, 2010. This was the day a massive, highly debated economic policy was formalized, and it gives us the perfect lens to see what happens when the sterile world of central banking violently collides with human reality. Respectfully, no. Let's start with a man who actually spoke those two words, Thomas Hoenig, and the immediate, heavy aftermath of his decision. So, right after casting that dissenting vote in Washington during the Federal Open Market Committee meeting, Hoenig just sits through the polite formalities as the meeting wraps up. Then he flies all the way back to Kansas City in dead silence. He takes a tense 45-minute drive from the airport straight to his stately red brick Tudor house in Missouri's historic Brookside neighborhood. And when he gets there, he retreats straight upstairs to his converted bedroom study and just shuts the door. Think about the sheer isolation of his position here. His wife, Cynthia, knew he was under massive stress simply by how incredibly quiet he was. But because FOMC proceedings are strictly confidential by law, he couldn't even tell her what had just happened in that room. Instead, she, just like the rest of the world, had to rely on the media and read the final public vote tally just to understand what her own husband had done at work that day. Section 2. The $600 billion bomb. So the big question is, what exactly was Hoenig so stressed out about voting against? Why was he such an outlier? $600 billion. Just look at all those zeros. It represents the sheer scale of the Federal Reserve's unprecedented plan announced that day. It's a number so staggeringly huge, it's honestly hard for the human brain to properly wrap its head around. What we're talking about here is quantitative easing. Now, the economy was supposedly on the mend, but unemployment was just stubbornly high. So the Fed leadership, spearheaded by Chairman Ben Bernanke, presents the $600 billion injection as a temporary insurance policy to stoke economic growth. But let's strip away the polite economic jargon for a second. The Fed was essentially preparing to create a massive amount of money entirely out of thin air and pump it directly into the banking system. Hoenig firmly believed this was a dangerous move that would inflate risky asset bubbles, and that is exactly why he voted no. Section 3. Chalkboards and conspiracies. Because while Hoenig was sitting in dead silence in his study in Missouri, the public reaction was doing the exact opposite. It perfectly shows how complex monetary policy gets totally warped when it hits the mainstream media. Just watch how fast this escalates throughout the day. In the morning, you've got this room full of economists holding a very polite, ultra-confidential vote. In the afternoon, a deeply stressed central banker flies home in silence. But by that evening, in less than 12 hours, a completely dry monetary policy decision became explosive television. It's just a brilliant, crazy contrast. On one hand, you have polite bankers in a locked room murmuring about yield curves and liquidity. On the other hand, you have conservative media host Glenn Beck, a massive driving voice of the Tea Party movement at the time, broadcasting to millions of deeply trusting viewers, pacing around in a rumpled suit and tennis shoes. Beck takes to the airwaves, scrawls that massive $600 billion number across a chalkboard, and then moves over to this incredibly complex flowchart with large cartoonish arrows supposedly showing the flow of money and influence. According to the source material, the chart started with a cartoon of a union boss in a bowler cap smoking a cigar and ended with some grand revelation involving top hat-wearing bankers. For a public that was already financially distressed, it took a complex $600 billion monetary policy and turned into a highly politicized conspiratorial spectacle. Section 4. The Chairman Speaks. To counter this totally chaotic public narrative, the Federal Reserve realized it couldn't just hide in the shadows anymore. They had to carefully stage manage their own message to the world. Enter Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke. To explain their actions, the central bank stages this highly controlled press room. The whole scene is deliberately crafted. Bright lights set up for the TV cameras, a single chair placed behind a lectern.
Bernanke sits down, opens a folder, and simply says, "Good afternoon," to rows of well-dressed journalists who are staring back with deadly serious glowers from behind their rectangular tables.
I really want to emphasize the real-world stakes here. We aren't just talking about a standard press conference. Every single word Bernanke spoke, these journalists were frantically typing onto their open laptops. And those keystrokes weren't just writing articles for tomorrow's newspaper. They were instantly transmitting to eager crowds of financial traders staring at glowing screens all across the world. Literally a single sentence from that lectern could instantly move billions of dollars across global markets.
Section 5. Winners, Losers, and Legacy. Let's wrap this explainer up by looking at the wildly different worlds that collided over this one monumental economic policy. You really see a stark divide here. On one side, you have the Fed's intended policy, this clinical, calculated attempt by a few economists to basically fix the plumbing of the American economy by adjusting interest rates and money supply. But on the other side, you have the human reality. Thomas Honig's profound, silent personal stress in his study, the highly politicized narrative drawn out on Glenn Beck's chalkboard, and the hyper-fast market frenzy of traders just waiting for Ben Bernanke to clear his throat. So, when an institution has the power to literally create $600 billion out of thin air in a single afternoon, who actually controls the impact of that money? Is it the silent dissenter trying to warn everyone about asset bubbles? Is it the screaming broadcaster shaping the public's anger? Or is it the global trader moving capital at the speed of a keystroke? It's a massive, systemic question about the very nature of our money, and it's one that I highly encourage you to keep pondering long after the dust settles on the incredible events of November 2010.